Welcome everyone to part 6 of the Client Build 25 build log. I'm working on the very last part of this build that needs to be done before it's complete, and it turns out it's this bundle of cables down the left hand side. Now, because I want all of the cables, the strands, to run parallel to each other from one component to the next, it means finding that perfect combination of cables, because they all come and go from and to different places, which means, their positioning isn't necessarily going to be parallel. They may have to cross at some point, but I want them to be as parallel as possible, certainly where it's fully visible. And I don't want to even say how much time I spent on this, but I will say that this customer had views particularly aligned with ours about the way things need to be done. There's only one thing left to be done now before the build is complete, and it turns out it's another mod. So this case is heavily modified, as you've seen previously in the build log, and a lot of the mods were done to the front panel for the front 360mm radiator and fans. Now I had to mount the fans on the outside, otherwise none of this would have worked or fit. And the fans aren't really supposed to be mounted on the outside. I mean, by default there's drive bays in here and all kinds of plastic which I've cut out. I've replaced the panel in behind it for mounting the 360mm radiator with an aluminium panel. But if the fans are on the front, it means this ventilation doesn't really work because the fans are out past it. And when this front panel door, which we have on the Define R5, is shut, this sound dampening material is going to be touching the fans and probably even stopping them from spinning. There's no way we're going to be able to get proper airflow through the front at all. And airflow through the front is absolutely vital in this build because it's not just for the front radiator, it's also for the top radiator. And we have dual high-end loops and a lot of hot components like the 6950X. So I've decided to open up this front panel. I'm not going to do offset panels or anything hidden. It really needs to be opened up, otherwise we are not going to get the performance that we need, the cooling performance for this build. So I'm going to cut a big square out of this. And this is actually part of a prototype. We've cut it out on our CNC router. So this is something that we can do now. We can cut out custom case panels, anything you could possibly want. We can also laser etch logos or whatever you want onto them. So that is going to be the front panel grille, and it's going to allow plenty of airflow. And I'm going to point it, I think, towards the back. You can see the triangle design here. I think it'll be nice to have something that's not symmetrical on the front. It'll, make it look quite interesting. Now, I was thinking about this. I could polish the alloy to a mirror, but I just don't think it's going to suit this build. It's very subtle and understated, so I'm going to paint it the same satin black that I've painted the rest of the case. system is complete, and it's now time for a good look around. This is going to be an information section of the build log for our fellow enthusiasts and system builders, so if you don't like the info, please just skip ahead. So where do I start? There is just so much here to cover. I think I'm going to start with the case mods, which you kind of already know, but I just want to do a summary. Let's start with the front panel. So as you can see, I've now completed the front panel mods. The door ended up way too close to the fans. You can see that if it weren't for the ventilation, also with how thick this is, it almost would have been touching the fan blades, which would completely have restricted airflow. And this is because these fans are supposed to be mounted on the inside of the case, not on the outside. But I had to mount them on the outside, otherwise none of this would have actually worked or fit. And you can see how close the reservoirs would have ended up. This power supply shroud would have to have been shorter. You know, it would have changed a lot. Either that or I could have used a thinner radiator. But, I mean, I had to hack apart the entire front panel anyway. So it was only a small mod to finish this off with this laser cut piece that I had from a prototype of something, which I've just painted in the same satin black that I've painted the rest of the case with to match. This fan isn't switching on. I need to adjust the start boost to go for just a little bit longer. It's set to 2 seconds right now. It's not enough to get all of the fans to kick in. Sometimes, you know, this one doesn't work. Sometimes it's this one. It's just because they're right now running at 10% of their RPM, which is kind of a bit low. I might have to increase it to about 15 or 20% because the fans don't like spinning this slowly. They're only doing about 200 RPM. So yeah, I just need to adjust the fan curve in the Aqua 6 XT. So you can see this entire front panel has all been modified. All of the plastic has been cut out of here. There's an aluminium panel that the front radiator and fans are mounted to, which is custom aluminium. Around the back here, we have the motherboard tray has been cut up. A big piece is being cut out of the bottom here. And this panel in here is all custom. There used to be drive bays in there, so that's another custom aluminium panel, which is bent and wrapped around the 24-pin cable in there as a cable shroud. You can see the 24-pin just disappears right underneath it. You can only see about 10 millimeters of that cable. And then that panel actually gives the case a lot more strength as well. It kind of stops the case from doing this kind of movement, which it was starting to do without the drive bays, because you can see that, you know, the drive bays kind of went all the way down, because obviously this is the Fractal Definer 5. So modification to the top panel, just for the fill ports, a little square cut out, this aluminium piece put in. And then we have the power supply shroud, which is custom built from the ground up. And there's another piece on this end of it. It fits the Aqua 6 XT and keeps all of the cable mess nicely hidden underneath. Not that it's actually that messy, because we've gone to a lot of effort with the custom cables in this build. So let's next look at lighting, because we don't really have any lighting in this build, because this is more of a, you know, understated kind of workstation. We didn't want to do anything flashy or over the top. I might actually change the lights to white on the motherboard. I don't know why I have it set to red. It kind of doesn't suit, because the only other light is on the SLI bridge, and it's white. I think white lights would make this look more elegant. So that's something I'm going to do as well before it ships. So that's the only lighting, just the motherboard and the SLI bridge. Let's take a look at the loops, and there's really a lot to look at here. So as usual, Bits Power Black Sparkle fittings, 16mm hardline compression fittings, Bits Power 16mm acrylic tube. Let's start with the GPU loop. So coming out of the pump top, we have a 90-degree single rotary, and it was so close to the power supply shroud that I had to use a 90-degree dual rotary to create an offset to get around it, and that's about 5 millimeters away there. And then a large telescopic fitting and you're not really going to be able to see this. It's so tight down there. All of this was, I was luckily able to build outside of the system, and then I just put the entire thing into the build all at once with the fittings on it and everything ready to go. But otherwise it wouldn't have been possible because you just can't get your hands in under there. So then there's two 90-degree single rotaries, and then there's a series of extensions, a 30mm and a 50mm extension to get back to the radiator. And there was no way I could ever have dreamed of using tube under there. Like a lot of people say, that's too many fittings. Well, you try, put tube in there. It's just not going to happen. You couldn't even get soft tube under there. We have a T-fitting with the drainage system on it, connected with a mini D-plug, a 90-degree single, across to the GPUs with two 90-degree singles, parallel configuration, 90-degree single, 90-degree dual, and back into the pump top. So I decided to keep this loop all down the bottom here, just because it's a lot cleaner. So the entire loop is just confined to this area, instead of going back up to the top of the res, which I think really would have made a mess. And then at the top here, the fill port was kind of difficult to connect. You can see quite a few fittings, but we have a 90-degree single, large telescopic fitting, a 90-degree dual, then a 90-degree single, and then a 15mm extension fitting back there. And then for the other fill port, we have a 20mm extension and a medium telescopic fitting. Very hard to see. You can imagine how hard this was to actually install. I mean, if you can't see it, how did I install it? And that's why this build was a serious challenge. So again, we're not going to be able to see any of this, but we have, well, let's look at the drainage system. It's just two 90-degree singles and a mini D-plug and a bits per mini valve. Then coming out of the pump top over there, we have a 90-degree single, 90-degree dual, 90-degree single, 90-degree single, 90-degree dual on a 20mm extension. Same thing coming out, 90-degree single, another one. Coming out of the back over there, we have two 90-degree singles and a 90-degree dual to wrap around the back of the fans and, you know, stay really close to them while doing so. And then that tube comes back across the top to the reservoir into a 90-degree single. And that's it. That's both of the loops and all of the fittings that I've used for those who are interested. Let's take a look at the cables. There's not a lot to see around the front here because they're very well hidden, which certainly took a lot of effort as always. But you can see the front panel cables taking off back across the top here, and all of this had to be modified. The cables ended up with a different routing compared to stock, and yeah, I had to put quite a bit of time and effort into that. Plus, as always, they're all sleeved right back to the connectors, and all of the connectors are being used there, whereas sometimes I just remove some of them and don't use them. Underneath here we have temp sensors and Aquabus connected to both of the pumps, and you can see the temp sensor plugs just there. The temp sensors on the Aquacomputer Aquabus pumps are actually a pass-through, so this wraps around and plugs in. If you want to see all of the Aquera 6XT config hardware and software that I've done for this build, I'll put a link in the video description to a video that I've done on the other channel, the Singularity Computers dev channel, where I go into detail on the fan and pump RPM curves that I've set up, and you know how I've done the hardware, which is absolutely like integral to the RPM curves. For the PCIe cables, I decided to go between the graphics cards. It was just the only place that they were going to fit. There's only one hole for them back there with the mods that I've done. I couldn't go down because of the tubes. I had to go through the middle, but that worked out really well. That's what I wanted to do anyway. So they're all nicely laid on top of each other. You can see the bottom 8 pin goes first, then the top 8 pin, then the bottom 6 pin, and then the top 6 pin. And they actually lay parallel to each other all the way back to the power supply, and they're the perfect length. And we've actually done different lengths on the same cables in this build to get all of the cables to sit right without having to tie them. And these cables were prototyped up to 4 times. I built the 24 pin 4 times to get it right. It has 24 different lengths to get it to sit how I wanted it to sit, and also so that there is absolutely no excess mess anywhere. So you can barely see the 8-pin EPS and 4-pin ATX up there, very difficult to plug in. And that's about it here. I mean, because we have no lighting and because we have an Aquera 6 XT, which everything else is plugged into, there's not a lot going on in terms of cables on the front.